As quilters, we love going into a quilt shop and seeing all that beautiful fabric and getting wonderful ideas and just engaging with other people who do the same thing we do. It is a lot of fun and it is so inspiring. And we get so many ideas just from looking at fabric. And then, of course, there's the pre-cuts. Oh my goodness, those tidy little bundles that are just the right size to come home with us at any time. Well, I'm here to talk to you about charm squares, and I have some great ideas, some creative ideas you are going to love. I'm Leah Louise from Inspired Quilting by Leah Louise, and I can't wait to show you this. This is my favorite block to use charm squares with, and it is fantastic. It is so versatile. You can use lots of different colors. You get your dark, medium, and lights. That's really important to get a fantastic quilt design. But let's talk more about that in just a minute. I'm ready to get started. Let's go. Before we get started, I want to show you how fabulous this quilt turned out. All these fabrics together in one quilt top look so wonderful. The way they're spaced out, the way they're balanced between light, dark, medium, the various colors. We have blues, greens, and turquoise golds, and some pinky colors, some rose. I mean, we've got it all in here. And it just works beautifully. And that's what I want to show you, how to put a quilt like this together, because it goes together simply with some basic techniques of color selection and putting together the color combinations that you want, and then finding out what works with them. What else can you match up? What else can you bring in? What other colors will enhance the design, accent it, create a background? And so there's a lot of what I'd call low volumes in here, because they work as a great background and sort of balance everything out. So we also have these darker colors, and these work fabulously well between all the light colors. And I love these green blocks. Those colors worked out so well. I am really excited about that. And the gold, I think, is great with this pretty little blue with the gold flower, and then we have some gold blocks to go with it. And of course the turquoise, we've got to get some of that in here too, and it works great. So I'm going to show you how to do this, but first I have another quilt I want to show you. This is also a 9-patch, and I want to show you that this is the block right here. So we have 3 blocks by 3 blocks. And the way this laid out is, we got some strings in there. We have 3 levels of color. We have our focal fabrics, which are these 5. And then we sort of tuck our background or our low volume in these 3 with an accent. And this accent carries these focal fabrics, but it also kind of adds a little more interest. Now, these are different fabrics than what you're going to find in the other 5. So it creates even more interest, but yet these 3 that are the low volume in here really give some balance to the block. And if you look, let's see, 1, 2, 3, here we go. Here's one in the middle that's kind of a fun one. So we have our 3, which is the lighter color, the low volume. And then we have our 5, and we have our accent. And the block itself doesn't look like, oh, hey, I can see that block. If you didn't know this was a 9-patch, you probably wouldn't figure that out without getting up close and personal and actually counting it out. But it is such a great way to make a quilt and use your charm squares. This is a fantastic charm square quilt, and it's made exactly in the same manner that I'm going to show you today on the larger quilt that I just finished. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm anxious to show this to you. I've been holding on to this fabric for a few months. I found it at a quilt show in South Carolina and absolutely fell in love with this particular piece of fabric, and I wanted more. And the price was great. Oh my goodness, these fat quarters were $2.50 a piece, which is a really good price. But I love the blue background and these sort of golden yellow flowers and the lines. It's just everything that I like. And the color in particular of the background is what struck me. So I started looking for other fabrics that I could put along with it. And these were just some things, a little of them, a little, outside the box, but I always kind of draw outward and then pull it in and see what works. So these were some colors, and this was probably one of my favorite. This is an art gallery fabric. I want to hold it up so you can see it. And it has a light yellow and a dark yellow that overlay each other. And they're just these beautiful petaled flowers. And they produce this particular pattern in lots of different colors. And I love it. And I've used it in a number of different colors. So I was excited to find that because I knew this was going to look wonderful together. And so I kept looking, and then, oh my goodness, I found this one. Now, I don't know who makes these fabrics or where they come from. I know they're part of the same collection because they're floral, but they also have these little flecks of metallic in them. It's sort of a silver metallic. And my guess is they go together, but I don't know. I can't find anything on the selvage. I have no idea who makes them. But so I gathered some more, and I thought this was just wonderful. It's just so basic, but yet it's a great background. It's a wonderful way to add color. It's almost a blue-green gray, and it's perfect for these. And then gold, of course. Notice how these have the same golds, and that's the other reason why I knew they matched, because the golds were the same, and this flower is a darker version of that color. And so this is a cotton and steel. It's darker, but that's okay. We want light, dark, and medium in all our colors. This is way outside my box. Look at all that glittery fabric. Can you see how that just sort of shines? But it's fun, and it has the gold colors, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go with it and see what I end up with. So I started pulling fabrics together, and I had another collection of fabrics that I'd been holding on to, and I thought, these are going to go great together. So let me show you those. So adding fabrics together, the first thing I put in was this group of fabric. It's the Ballerina Fusion collection from Art Gallery Fabrics. And it's a pinky peach, and it's pale and it's beautiful, definitely low volume. And I had some other Art Gallery fabrics that the colors were the same, but a little more intense in color. And so those came in really well. Then I found these fun little pieces. Oh my goodness. Then I had this group that I bought when I was at another quilt show. I do love to find my fabrics that way, because when you buy fabrics from shops that are from different parts of the country, you get different fabrics. You'll find if you go to a lot of shops in the same area, the fabrics look the same. So I like reaching out a bit, but there were some great pieces in here that I wanted. And of course I had to dig into my Batiks and find a few. And my biggest disappointment is that my little bunnies don't really fit into this color scheme. So they got set aside for another particular quilt that will look wonderful with that. In the meantime, though, I have a great group of fabrics, but I needed a background and I couldn't decide where I wanted to go. I really wanted like some burgundies in here. That was just way too pink. I did find these little fat quarters that'll be fabulous. I had some wonderful yardage that I bought with some teals to bring out the greens and that tealy color. That, not that this is a teal, but I wanted to go with that blue green, and oh, I just love all these fabrics together. They are fantastic. Now the next step is, how do I make this all work in a quilt? With my fabrics all spread out, I started grouping them, and initially it was almost monochromatic, and I found I had this peachy pink color, I had turquoise, I had some greens, I had the blues and some golds, but I didn't want to create individual colors. I wanted it all to blend. And so essentially I started grouping them like this in fat quarters. And then I just stacked them and I cut them because I wanted to cut charm squares. I knew with all these fabrics, there's, I don't know, 50 or more, that I needed to go with smaller pieces and just let each fabric stand on its own. So we're making a super simple charm square quilt. And with each of these, I just lay my fat quarters out and I cut off a couple 5-inch strips and I cross cut them into charm squares. But what I wanted to show you about how I selected these is I wanted to make sure that when I spread these throughout the different blocks or the different groups at this point, I have light and dark. So I didn't want to have too many of any one color in a particular block. I do want that block to have a sense of a color. And when you look at it, you see, ooh, overall that's sort of a peachy color. And isn't that pretty? And so I found these pieces, and those really brought out the color. But notice that white background. That white background will really brighten up this quilt block. Sometimes if you keep too much of the same background, it's so monochromatic you can't see one fabric from the other because it all looks the same. And then I needed to add some color. Now this one, if you'll notice, has a little bit of green and lavender, lots of pink, some yellow, some gold, and there's bits of blue and purple. So this is a great blender piece because there's so much in there. This I like because there's varying shades of, it's not only pink, but there's some peach in here, particularly in this particular corner. So this works out really well. And I'm telling you, when you have little flecks of color kind of flitting about your quilt in different blocks, it blends things together so well and makes such a cohesive look to your whole quilt. So going off these blues and greens in there, I put in a couple of these colors, because initially when I grouped, it was everything by color. So I had a group of all these blue and teals, and I thought, well, if I'm going to have a block of peachy colors and a block of teal and then a block of that blue and yellow, that's really going to look checkerboardish. And I didn't want that. So what I decided is each block needed a focal block, and then it'll be surrounded by all these gorgeous colors. And these blocks will then be pre-assembled, pieced together, and then put together in a larger quilt. How awesome is that? Did you watch last week's video where I showed you all those charm square ideas? If you did, this is the 9 patch I was talking about and how versatile this is. What I want to show you is a couple groups of the fabrics that I pulled together. I've made some of the 9 patch blocks, and I just want to show you how wonderful they look. Now here's my first group of colors, and you can see there's dark, there's medium, and there's light. And predominantly, I'm pulling all the colors from this center block. So I have a bit of this blue-green, which really isn't in here, but there's enough light green and this gold that pulls it all together really well. So there are 3 seriously gold pieces, but notice that between these, they're light, dark, and medium. This is the light, there's dark, and there's medium. So that's going to kind of blend throughout the quilt very nicely. Then I have, some dark greens, and I mix those with a light green, and then something that sort of pulls those together, and then I have a couple with very light backgrounds. So remember when I told you about light, medium, and dark? You've got to do it because it is going to create so much more interest in your quilt. Now, these are all very pale colors, but because I incorporated multiple different colors and placed them sporadically, it comes together really nicely. Now, there's a couple here that I have in this block that I didn't include there. It's this pretty blue batik and this scallop fabric. And for whatever reason, I don't have it there. But I'm making 9 patches. So I decide on what my centerpiece is going to be. And then I pulled about 10 different fabrics to use on the outer edge. That way, every block won't be exactly the same. They'll be mostly the same, but there'll be an extra block here and there. So I just want to show you how these look. And so this gold works wonderfully here. And, you know, having the greens, in some of them I did replicate a pattern, but that's okay because it worked, and I'm good with that. But see how pretty this blue goes with that? And this is sort of that blue green. And here are those yellows, and then just some beigey color batiks for the background. But see how nice these all look? Oh my goodness, I love them. So when I put my quilt together, I chain piece all these, and the outer ones I press out, and this one I press in the other direction. Then I set this center seam, because when I put my quilt together, I put this one here and this one here. One seam will go up and one will go down in order to nest them. So I don't press these in either direction until after I sew it. And what I'll do is I'll just finger press it at the machine. But I'm just really happy with how all the corners are coming out, and doing the nesting makes such a big difference. Just look at these. Oh my goodness, aren't they wonderful? There are a number of ways I cut my fat quarters depending on how I'm using them initially. One of the most common is to cut charm squares. And a lot of times I'll just cut one row of charm squares, but for this quilt I'm going to cut two. So I just want to show you this. What I do is I lay my multiple layers and I match up this side. And I'll match up one corner, either the top or the bottom. And I'm going to just lay everything out. I'm going to come down here and cut 10 inches. So this is going to be extra leftover fabric, and it's going to go in my fat quarter pile of pieces left over. Then what I do is I'll cut across the top. Well, actually, the top probably should come first. Now, in this case, what I did is I overlapped these fabrics above the line I knew I was cutting, so I could cut here and then do my 10 inches up here and trim that off and still have plenty of fabric. So keep in mind what works best for you, whether you cut this first or this first. There is no right or wrong as long as you get a 10-inch piece. Then I trim off this and I trim off this. I trim this piece before I cut this in half at 5 inches, because this way I'll get longer strips. Even though they're going to be narrow, I can probably use them and be more apt to use them if they're longer than just the 5 inches. 10 inches can always work better. So then I come through and I cut this across, and then I cut each section by 5 inches. So this way I have all my fabrics in together, I don't want to say in order, but in a bundle together. And I did that also with the other group of fabrics that I cut. So these were cut from yardage, which means they were folded in half, so I had a pair of everything for each of these fabrics. So let me go ahead and finish sorting these out, and I'll show you what we do from there. I have my 8 piles because I cut 8 charm squares out of each fat quarter. Now I'm only going to need 7. I need 36 quilts, and I have 5 different bundles of fabric. And I'm going to create 7 blocks out of each of the colorways, which will give me 35, and then I'm going to make one more. And I'm just going to pick out a favorite block that I want to add. So this has all the colors. Let me just set these aside. I want to show you how we do this. And this is going to be my center block. So the first thing I do is I'll take a bundle, and the reason I group these is that every bundle that I have here, each has one of every fabric. And there could be anywhere from 9 to 10 different fabrics. So that gives me a group of fabrics to work with, and it also allows for me not to have repetition, that every block has exactly the same, because they won't. And let's see, I kind of will let these go around, And oh my goodness, I love that one. That one has to be in here. So I'm going to put these here. There's kind of a light corner and a bit of the turquoise down here, which is pretty. And then I take whatever's left and set it aside, and that's going to go in my charm pack pile. So now what I'm going to do is put these on top of each other, and I'm going to put them all in a pile so I know what's going to be sewn together. So once these are together, I'll put this one in, then this one, and then this one. So I know I'm going to sew these two, and I'll put that aside, then I'll sew these two, then I'll sew these two. So each block that I'm doing is going to be set like this. Let me do one more for you. And so we have this one, and let's go kind of like this. Let's see, that's awfully light. Let's take the light one out. This will be in every block. I love that color. And so now I'm just going to put these around and kind of mix them up a bit and put this here and there. And so there we are. We have a multitude of colors spread around. We have our center block, which is going to create basically the 9-patch pattern, but it's also going to allow for accents throughout the quilt with this particular block being similar in all the 9 patches. It may not be the same color, but they're all going to have a particularly strong color. So now that I have this, I'm going to put it on this pile in this direction, and then I'll take all these and I'll sew them. I lay these out in front of my machine, and I'll lay them like this, this, and this, and then I'll start sewing with these two, and then I'll add the other piece, the third one in the row. So I'll come here, let's see, where do we go? Let's do it this way. So I'll put these two together, and I'll sew all the way down through all 3 of them. Then I'll open that up, and I'll add the third block, so that once that's finished, my 9 patch is all pieced together. And I can just set this aside, and I do all my blocks this way first. Then I'll come back and I'll do the centerpiece. With my 9 patches all pre-sewn together, I need to start doing the seams that will connect them. But first, I want to press them. So I will take the center row and press it in one direction, and it doesn't matter, there's no right or wrong. Press it in one direction, and then the 2 outer rows in the opposite direction. That way, it's going to be very easy to nest your seams. So the seam is set, and that means the seam is nice and flat. You've already pressed it, and you put these together, and you get a great nested seam. Now, once that's done, I do go back and I press or set this seam as well. I'm not going to press it open one way or the other like I did these seams here, because as these blocks are connected throughout the quilt, sometimes a seam goes up, sometimes a seam goes down. So we just want to make sure that we get that pressing done in a way that will allow us to be flexible. So this is what the finished block looks like before I sew my quilt. So I have these pressed, and I have these seams sewn, and I have the seams set because it makes it nice and flat. It's going to make it so much easier to finger press in whatever direction you need as you're sewing. And so that's what these blocks are going to look like. The other thing I want to show you is when I initially set up my groups. Do you see, this is the one I just showed you. There's a lot of dark in there. And then my second group had a lot of light. So what you'll see in this block is I did some switching around as I put these together because I needed to balance this. I didn't want any particular block to be so light that it stood out from all the rest. I wanted them all to share the colors so that there was sort of an overall color scheme and that they all blend really well in the quilt as an overall design and not one standing out more than the other. Now, this was the other centerpiece that I absolutely loved, and I just think it's just so dainty and pretty. And I had enough greens that I made this more of a green with the gold accents. And I just think it's fabulous. I love it. But again, dark green, medium, and light, and a darker gold and a light gold, and then sort of this um, background that's very neutral that ties in with this. So keep in mind those color selections make a big difference. Now this one is a particularly dark one, and here we have all three of our golds. And that works out really well. We get some of the lighter greens and it all balances. And you can see how, as I did these, I sewed each block one at a time. I chain pieced it, but I put one together at a time. And I wanted to make sure that these pieces are not always in the same location. So sometimes they're in the center, other times they're in the corner. But again, we have 3 golds, we have 3 greens, and some accent pieces. And just see how well it works, even if they're side by side, or like in this one, they alternate. It gives a completely different look to the block, but yet we're carrying the same colors through. Now, this has more lighter fabrics and not as much dark. It has 2 of these mediums, but again, they're on opposite side of the blocks. And when these are all sewn together, you're not going to know, oh, wait, this is this block, this is that, because it's all just going to blend across the quilt beautifully. And then here's a couple more. I just love how these turned out. I am having a lot of fun with this quilt and working with charm squares this way. I'm telling you, that's why the 9 patch is my favorite. All right, let's look at a little more fabric. Now, here's a fun group of fabrics. Notice how much lighter this block is. So I have a dark green block. Those tend to be darker just because of the value, the intensity of the colors. Now, this one has a lot of light backgrounds. Now, this green is in here. So we have the green, we have the tealy blue, we have the mauve, as with this one with the rosy colors, but we have a lot of light backgrounds because I want to have the quilt light and dark. I want the quilt to sort of have a cross of all these colors and just be blended. And you see high points, you see, low, more background areas that let your eye rest over here. I just think that's a great way to do it. But by putting some green in here, that ties this quilt in, plus this green and these beigey colors and this mauve, it pulls it all together beautifully. And this is the group of fabrics that I used. And there's some fun pieces, some really pale pieces. I don't know if you can see, but that has text. And this one here, if I can find it, has text on it. And then this one has the prettiest little roses. So there's some really fun patterns and just some kind of wheatgrass growing in the field and a pretty little wreath pattern with little flowers with lots of the different colors that are in the quilt. So this works out really well. Now, even though this isn't gold, it sort of gives you that hint of a golden beige color. So it's going to work well with all those colors that are already in the quilt. So here we go. Let me just show you some of these and just, turning them around and putting them in different layouts, different designs, different patterns next to each other. It just keeps the quilt really interesting. And when these are all pieced together, it's going to be beautiful in one huge mass of color that is well designed and placed so that it doesn't really scream in one corner and get lost in the other. All right, I do want to show you the last group of fabrics that I'm working with. This group has more of the tealy turquoise than the other blocks, and that's intentional because I do want this color to be splashed across the quilt. This is where these colors come from. So these colors are mixed in with the peach so that we can tie it together, as I also have some peach here, and we have some of the greens, and here's another one of those peachy colors. So you see how it's all tying together, and then I have this bright one, but see the burgundy and that pink color, the mauve color, and that works perfectly with these center blocks. So I have 5 different sets of fabrics that I'm using. 2 of them have this dark burgundy. One is the light blue. The other is the white background with a kind of daisies. And then the last one is the lighter mauve color like this. So I think that's going to look terrific. So as these 9 patches are laid across the quilt, these center points are going to be sporadically placed and stand out and bring in some great color. So I cannot wait to put all these blocks together and see what it comes out like. And now I'm going to piece this together into my large quilt, and I'm so excited to see how this works. I'm really anxious to show you. Of course, I haven't seen it all together either, so it'll be great for all of us to share that at the same time. So let me get working on this, and I'll get it put together and show you what it looks like. And here's my finished 9-patch charm square quilt. I think it turned out wonderful. And if you look, you can see each individual 9-patch here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 by 6 for a total of 36 blocks. And each one finishes, I think it's about 13 inches. So it's 18 blocks across at 4.5, which is what, 9? So it's about 80 inches square. So this is a good size quilt. And I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. Again, I like the splashes of bright, bold colors, the blues and those sort of burgundy colors, and the green with the blue and those gold. Oh my goodness. And that pretty mauve and the peach. It all just works so well together to create a beautiful, beautiful quilt top. I can't wait to get this quilted, and I'll be showing you what we'll do there. I'm not quite sure just how I'll finish it yet, but it'll be wonderful, I'm sure. I'm so glad you shared this with me today. Thanks for following along. I appreciate you being here, and as always, it's my pleasure to share my quilting with you. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.